Most people use the internet every single day without giving much thought to what lies beneath it. The websites we visit, the apps we use, and even the videos we watch. All of that exists on what's called the surface web, the part of the internet that search engines can find and index. But the surface web is actually just a fraction of what's out there, and underneath sits something else entirely, a hidden layer of the internet that isn't indexed or accessible through a normal browser, and for the most part isn't visible to the average person at all. It's called the dark web, and while it's got legitimate uses, it's also become home to some of the most disturbing criminal networks ever uncovered, from drug markets to extremist communities, and to things that are genuinely difficult to put into words. In 2016, one site was discovered with content so extreme that the investigators who encountered it struggled to deal with it. And what law enforcement decided to do when they finally got inside it would shock the world. This is child's play. To understand what child's play was, we need to understand the world it was operating in. The tool that makes the dark web possible is called Tor, which stands for the Onion Router, and it was actually developed in the mid-1990s by the US Navy as a way of protecting government communications. The way it works is by taking your internet traffic and bouncing it through a series of volunteer-operated servers around the world, wrapping it in a new layer of encryption at each step, hence the Onion name. Each layer gets peeled back as it passes through each server, and by the time your data reaches its destination, it's been routed through enough nodes that tracing it back to you becomes nearly impossible. Websites on the dark web use .onion addresses instead of the .com that we're all used to, and they're not indexed anywhere, so you can't accidentally stumble across them. You'd have to know exactly where you're looking. Today, around 2.5 million people use Tor every single day, and the browser itself has been downloaded over 200 million times worldwide. The vast majority of those people are using it for completely legitimate reasons, like journalists working in countries with oppressive governments, people trying to protect their privacy online, or even just activists communicating securely. In fact, only around 1.5% of all Tor traffic actually leads to the dark web at all. But that 1.5% is where things get dark, and in 2016, it's where child's play was born. Its creator was Benjamin Faulkner, who grew up in North Bay, Ontario, a small city around 350 kilometers north of Toronto, sitting just above Lake Nipissing and the Great Lakes. His house was on the outskirts of town, with a garage almost as big as the main house itself, and a trampoline and an inflatable pool out the back. By all accounts, he was a happy kid, and his own mother described him as friendly, well-liked, gentle, and patient. He played trumpet in a local band, taught swimming at the local YMCA, where he worked regularly with children, and spent a lot of time on the internet. There was nothing about him that would have given anyone reason to be concerned. But what most people around him didn't know was that Faulkner had spent years building a very different kind of life online. He was a trained computer forensics specialist and had worked as something called a penetration tester, essentially a professional hacker which companies pay for to try and break into their own systems to find weaknesses before anyone else does. He knew the internet inside and out, understood encryption and anonymity tools, and knew exactly how to move around the web without leaving a trace, and he'd been quietly using those skills on the dark web for years under the username Curious Vendetta. Online he met Patrick Fault. He was 27 years old, from just outside Nashville, Tennessee, where he'd lived his whole life with his parents in a house half an hour from the city, in a gated community near a busy motorway interchange. Fault had grown up dreaming of working for the FBI to fight hackers, but from a young age, Fault had felt like he was different. As he grew older, his urges weren't directed towards other people his own age, but towards children. He'd found his way into dark web communities as a teenager, and by his mid-20s, he was running one of the largest CSAM sites on the internet, a forum called the Giftbox Exchange, which at its peak had around 45,000 members, and included a dedicated section for babies and toddlers. The two men first met through a dark web forum called the Pedo Support Community, where Faulkner had been active under his Curious Vendetta username. In the autumn of 2015, Fault, who went by the name Crazy Monk, sent Faulkner a message on the Giftbox exchange. "Hi, I haven't seen you for a while. I'm the boss around here." Fault was looking for a co-administrator with a strong background in cybersecurity, and Faulkner was exactly what he needed. Soon after, Faulkner quickly became part of the Giftbox leadership team, but he wasn't content being someone else's right-hand man. He had bigger ambitions. He wanted something of his own, and in April 2016, he got just that. On Friday the 15th of April 2016, Faulkner appeared under a new name, Warhead, and launched a new website on the dark web, Child's Play. His opening message to the community read, "With the security scares brought about recently, and the general lack of good forums anymore, I decided to bring Child's Play to the community. The goal of Child's Play is to provide a simple free access forum to the community, while simultaneously allowing a safe and secure place to talk and just be ourselves." That phrase, free access, was the key to everything. Most sites like this required new members to upload abuse material before they could even get through the door, which created a barrier that kept numbers down. Faulkner ditched that model completely. Anyone could register, no questions asked, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. Suggestions poured in from members on how to make the site better, safer, and more organized. Faulkner implemented these ideas quickly, and the community helped shape what Child's Play became. The forum was divided into dedicated sections organized by victim age and abuse type. There were subsections for images, for videos, for user-generated content, for live streaming, and a section dedicated specifically to child torture. Members could upload material directly, share links, post in discussion threads, and in some cases watch abuse being carried out in real time, with other users tuning into live streams as it happened. The more content a user contributed, the more privileges they unlocked, including moderator roles and access to the most heavily restricted sections of the site. It functioned almost like a reward system, one designed to keep people producing, sharing, and coming back. At its peak, the site had over 1 million registered user profiles, with around 3,000 to 4,000 people active on any given day. Among those active users were more than 100 known producers, people who were actively filming children being abused and uploading the footage directly to the site for others to view and download. The material being shared spanned users from the United States, Canada, Australia, and across Europe, with contributions running into the millions of individual files. But with all the growth, Faulkner was also paranoid. He knew that sites like this attracted law enforcement attention, and he'd built in a specific failsafe to protect himself and his users. Every month, without fail, he would post a message to the community, a kind of check-in to let members know the site was still safe and still under his control. If that message didn't appear, users were to take it as a signal that Child's Play had been compromised by police, and they were to scatter immediately. He called it a canary, and it was, as far as he was concerned, the last line of defense between 1 million users and law enforcement. But he had no idea that within months, that failsafe would be the very thing investigators were racing against the clock to crack. As time went on, investigators would eventually learn about Child's Play, but identifying the person behind it was another matter entirely. Paul Griffiths, a detective with Task Force Argos, Queensland Police's specialist online child exploitation unit, had spent time reading through everything Warhead had ever written, and he knew exactly what he was dealing with. Two technically sophisticated men who understood encryption, anonymity, and how to cover their tracks better than most people in law enforcement. But Faulkner eventually made a mistake. While he was running Child's Play, and still co-running the Giftbox exchange with Fault, he ran into a problem with some of the site's code in the summer of 2016. He couldn't fix it himself, and so he did what a lot of programmers do. He took a screenshot of the problematic code and posted it on a public programming forum on the clear web asking for help. A Homeland Security investigator in Boston had noticed a technical problem with the gift box exchange around the same time, and on a hunch started searching the open internet for anyone asking about that specific piece of code. Soon enough, they found the screenshot. It had been uploaded to a Russian server used almost exclusively for CSAM. The man who'd posted it was in his mid-20s and from North Bay, Ontario. His name was Benjamin Faulkner. Finding fault was even more straightforward. To pay for the gift box exchange's server hosting, he'd used Bitcoin, which should be almost impossible to trace, but he'd registered his Bitcoin wallet to his personal email address, which Homeland Security traced in minutes. Now law enforcement had both names, but knowing who the two men were wasn't enough, because if either of them sensed they were being watched, they could wipe the sites in seconds, and every crucial piece of evidence would be gone with them. So investigators did the only thing they said they could do. They watched, and they waited. As time went on, they realized that Faulkner and Fault weren't just connected online. They'd met in real life before, and they had a habit of meeting up in person. Investigators decided that their next meetup would be their best shot, and it wouldn't take long for Faulkner to cross the US border from Canada to visit Fault. And on the morning of October 3, 2016, the FBI broke into the home. During the search of the house, Homeland Security found a video camera Faulkner had brought from Canada, along with pictures and videos of them taking advantage of a 4-year-old girl. Faulkner was identified in at least one of the images, and the man who'd given them access to the child was a user from the site, and he'd filmed the whole thing himself. This, on its own, was enough evidence to prosecute them on the spot. Faulkner had written many times online that if he was ever arrested, he'd do everything he could to keep police away from Child's Play and its members. But the moment officers broke his door in and forced him onto the floor, all of that changed. Within minutes, he handed over everything. Usernames, passwords, encryption keys, all of it. The information was transmitted immediately to a team on the other side of the world in Brisbane, who started testing the passwords as fast as they could type them in, as messages flew between the US and Australia. In a single night, law enforcement had gained control of not just one, but both of the largest CSAM websites on the internet. But now, the clock was running, because if Warhead went silent for too long, 1 million users would disappear. Within hours of the arrest, Paul Griffiths and his colleague John Rouse at Task Force Argos in Brisbane were testing Faulkner's passwords on Child's Play's server. When the logins worked, they had a decision to make, and they had to make it fast. They could shut the site down immediately, which would end everything, but tell investigators almost nothing about who its members were and where the children in the images were located. Or they could do something that had never been attempted on this scale before. They could keep the site running and continue their investigation. And so, they chose to keep it running. By this point, the Canary was due within a day. Griffiths started reading every post Warhead had ever written, every forum reply and every private chat he could access, just so he could study his vocabulary, his specific typos, his sense of humour, and even some personal details he'd let slip over the months of running the site. 4 days after Faulkner's arrest, Warhead reappeared on Child's Play with a post that read, "Phew, what a month that was. A month of my life that I won't get back. Although technically most of the really screwed up shit happened in October, not September, hence my late foray into this month. Sorry again about the late arrival, but I did ask the staff team to step in and cover for me in my enforced absences." But there was just one issue. The Canary wasn't just a written message. Faulkner had built in one additional requirement that he was certain would make a police takeover impossible. Every single monthly update had to end with an image of CSAM, because he believed no police force anywhere in the world would ever be willing or legally permitted to post one. It was the one safeguard he genuinely believed they couldn't get past. Task Force Argos had already committed to running the site, and this one requirement was standing in the way between destroying everything or keeping the facade going. The images they'd use were already existing CSAM, but it was still a line they'd have to cross. And so they did. They posted the image. To their relief, the community accepted it. Some members had suspicions, and were talking to each other privately about it, and Griffiths knew that, but they didn't warn anyone else. The Canary had been posted, Warhead was back, and as far as the million-plus users of Child's Play were concerned, everything was fine. But it wasn't. Warhead was now Paul Griffiths of the Queensland Police Service, and the site's server was quietly moved from Europe to one in Sydney, putting it under Australian jurisdiction. For 11 months, from October 2016 to September 2017, Task Force Argos ran the world's largest CSAM website from a police station in Brisbane. Every monthly Canary went out on time, each one ending with an image to maintain the cover. Officers monitored the activity of every user on the site, read private messages, tracked IP addresses, and built profiles on the most active producers, all while the site continued to function exactly as it always had. Under police administration, the content on the site quadrupled, growing from around 3,000 posts containing images to over 12,000. A thread featuring images of an 8-year-old, posted 2 weeks after Argos took over the site, was viewed just under 800,000 times while police were running it. Nobody on the site had any idea, and they'd have never found out if someone on the other side of the world hadn't been watching the exact same forum. While Task Force Argos had been running Child's Play from Brisbane, a Norwegian journalist named Håkon Højdahl and his colleague Einar Stangvik had been investigating the same site for months for VG, a Norwegian tabloid newspaper. The two had previously worked together on stories about Norwegian men accessing CSAM online, and turned their attention to the dark web after sources made clear there was far more activity happening there than on the open internet. Stangvik had built his own software to monitor and index public activity on Child's Play, pulling down posts, analysing traffic patterns, and trying to identify users. By the time Christmas 2016 approached, Stangvik had managed to identify several members, a handful of Norwegians, Swedes, and a Dane, but Warhead himself, and whoever was behind the site, remained completely untraceable, until he tried a different approach. Instead of analysing what was posted on the forum, he looked at the software running underneath it, and soon enough, he found a vulnerability. If the server was asked the right question in the right way, it would reveal its own IP address. He asked the question, and the server replied. It was located in Sydney, Australia, hosted by a company called Digital Pacific. Højdahl flew to Sydney and walked into the Digital Pacific offices. He told the founder, Andrew Collodine, that one of his servers was hosting the world's largest CSAM website, and he wanted to find out who was renting it. Collodine ran a search, and not long after, they had the answer. The server was leased by Task Force Argos in Brisbane. Højdahl then flew to Brisbane and made contact with the unit. Paul Griffiths and John Rouse agreed to meet him at a burger restaurant near their headquarters. Højdahl told them he knew they were running Child's Play, and had been for months, but they told him they weren't going to discuss an ongoing operation, and suggested that what Stangvik had done to locate the server might itself be illegal under Australian law. But they knew their cover was blown. Højdahl had a story that would make front pages around the world, but Argos asked him to sit on it, explaining that publishing would immediately alert every user on the site and destroy months of work identifying abusers and locating children. Højdahl and his editors at VG agreed to wait, on the understanding that investigators would keep them updated on arrests made and children rescued as the operation progressed, but those updates never really came. By mid-September 2017, Stangvik discovered on his own by monitoring the site's traffic that Argos had quietly shut Child's Play down 2 days earlier without telling him. So on the 7th of October 2017, VG published everything. For the first time, the public found out that the world's largest CSAM website had been run by police for 11 months, and that officers had posted child abuse images every month to maintain their cover. UNICEF's legal advisor said it was a clear violation of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and Amnesty International said the tactics were unacceptable under human rights law. And at the time of the operation, Australian law didn't even have explicit provisions allowing police to possess or share CSAM for investigative purposes, meaning the officers had been operating in a legal grey area the whole time. The mother of one of the victims whose images had been shared during the operation came forward and said her daughter shouldn't have been used as bait, and that every time those images were shared with another person, they were hurting her child further, not helping her. But Task Force Argos said that every day the site ran, they were identifying real abusers and locating real children, and that shutting it down the moment they got inside it would have meant all of that was lost. The operation led to arrests in more than a dozen countries, the identification of over 900 suspects, and more than 85 children being removed from situations of ongoing abuse. As for Faulkner and Fault, they were both sentenced to life in prison for the abusive content of the 4-year-old girl in Virginia, and each received an additional 35 years for running a child exploitation enterprise. Both tried to end it all, while awaiting sentencing. At Faulkner's second sentencing hearing, as the prosecutor read through the full list of his online activities, he covered his face with his hand and his shoulders started shaking. His lawyer initially thought he was crying, but he wasn't. He was laughing. Even after his lawyer told him to stop, it took a while for the grin to leave his face. Later, in a series of phone interviews from prison, he was asked whether he had any regrets. He said, "I would do it again, for sure." It's difficult to know how to feel about the whole operation, and I think it's important to be honest about that rather than just picking a side. On the one hand, children were re-victimized every time those images were shared, and the police were essentially hosting a platform for abusers to continue to promote and share the abusive material. But on the other, the operation led to over 85 children being rescued from ongoing abuse, more than 900 suspects identified across over a dozen countries, and arresting abusers like Tyler Walker, a 21-year-old Canadian site administrator sentenced to 5 years, Robert Zitzelsberger, a former science teacher from Sydney who'd been a member of the site, and Andrew Leslie from Florida, who was also running his own network featuring the abuse of infants and toddlers and was eventually sentenced to 90 years in prison. These are people who, without that operation, would have walked free. But what it cost to find them all is something that's hard to come to terms with.